to our Advocacy for Social Change Talk Story series. My name is Jose Brazil from the Matsunaga Institute for Peace at the University of Hawaii. Today's event will focus on protecting Kapūkaki, coalition building to shut down Red Hill, with Shelley Muneoka, Sam Ikehara, Rebekah, Garrison, and Anna Chua. Thank you for joining us today to explore organized efforts and mechanisms for social change. Today's conversation will be about what has been happening with Red Hill, how has this crisis impacted us, and how will it continue to affect life in Hawaii. Join us for a talk story about the coalition to permanently shut down Red Hill and how you can get involved in the struggle. I will introduce our moderator, who will then take it away. Today's moderator is Anna, who is a Malaysian and Indonesian Chinese woman, water drinker, and settler on Oahu. She's the Red Hill organizer of the Sierra Club of Hawaii and a recent Peace and Conflict Studies major graduate and a psychology graduate as well. So thank you so much, Anna, for gathering us all together today.
Hey, thank you, Jose, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Protecting Kapūkaki, Coalition Building to Shut Down Red Hill. Thank you all so much for being here and taking the time out of your Thursday afternoon to talk story. So as Jose mentioned, I'm the moderator for today. And yeah, I'm excited to introduce all these amazing wahine who are on the panel. But before that, I just want to give a quick spiel about today's talk story and what exactly we're going to be discussing. So essentially, we'll be journeying through what's happening with the Red Hill crisis right now, how this catastrophe has impacted us, how it'll continue to affect all life on Oahu and across the archipelago, and importantly, how we can continue organizing to win this protracted fight. As I'm sure most of you know, we started off this week with the Department of Defense announcing that it'll shut down Red Hill. And while this unexpected news sent, a lot of shockwaves across our communities, we're still here today. We're standing strong and tall because this struggle is unfortunately far, far from over. As long as there's still over 100 million gallons of fuel in those decrepit tanks, we're still in harm's way. We can't take the Navy or the Pentagon for its word until the 80-year-old menace is shut down once and for all, until all communities, parties involved, and the environment is fully remediated and compensated for the damage that the Navy has already inflicted and will continue to incur, and until we can absolutely be sure that the fuel does not harm any other communities here or anywhere else in the Pacific. So we'll continue to be here and to be a thorn in the Pentagon side because we have to, and because we're the only ones that can keep us safe. And so as a settler to Hawaii, I would also like to recognize that these lands and waters on which we're holding this talk story as belonging to Kānaka Maoli from time immemorial, now and forever. I'd also like to express gratitude and respect to the Kānaka leaders of this fight and interconnecting movements for justice and liberation, all of which inspire, inform, and guide the work that we all do. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our three amazing panelists for today's event. First up is Shelley. Shelley Muneoka is a Kānaka Maoli woman and water drinker from Heiauli on the island of Oahu. Her work focuses on the care of past, present, and future elders of all kinds, human and more than human, like plants, animals, and elements like water. And we also have Sam. Sam Ikehara has been sustained by the waters of the Mauna Loa Waimalo aquifer her entire life. Her academic and community work addresses legacies of war and militarism in Hawaii, where she was born and raised, and Okinawa, where her family comes from. She is a PhD candidate in American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California. And Rebekah Garrison is a white settler and born and raised in Humboldt County, the ancestral lands and waters of the Hupa, Karuk, Matolo, Tuluwat, Wiyot, and Yurok peoples. She is a water drinker and community organizer with Hawaii Peace and Justice, who calls Manoa home. And so I'd like to also add that in honor of Women's History Month, it's a great pleasure to be uplifting these powerful trailblazer wahine who helped to lead, guide, and shape this movement. And thank you so much, Jose, for setting up this space and helping us along every step of planning this event. Seriously, it's been critical to everything that's happening right now. So thank you, Jose, and to the Matsunaga Institute and to all the co-sponsors. And so before I pass it on to Shelley, who has gracefully offered to share some background and contextualize this crisis, I wanted to quickly share some reminders about respectful engagement in this Zoomverse. So importantly, I think let's keep our collective kuleana to protect our water and Kapūkaki at the forefront of our intentions today. And as we move throughout the talk story, we invite you all to ponder on the critical topics and the questions shared, and to share your inquiries and curiosities in the chat, whether you are here on Zoom or streaming through Facebook. So Jose and I will be keeping track of all the questions asked, and we're going to try and weave them throughout the discussion, but we also have set up some time at the end of the talk story to answer questions and further discuss with you all here today. So for folks who can stay a little longer after 5 p.m., we'll also keep the space open for a little bit longer to keep talking story. And so, yeah, this is, a brave and safe space. And I'm sure we can all agree that it takes a lot of courage to challenge and disrupt power to effect true transformational radical change. So deep breaths. I'll pass it off to my comrade, Shelley.
Aloha everyone, my name is Shelley Muneoka. Thank you so much for a chance to speak on this topic today. I wanted to start first with a line from the chant called He Mele no Kane, or Ai Hea Kawaya Kane, that is repeated throughout this chant, and it starts He Uia He Ni No, a query, a question. Ai Hea Kawaya Kane, where's the water of Kane? And if you ever get a chance to look more closely or study this chant, we're only going to be able to cover a short section of it today. It's really a chance to kind of take a little peek into the poetry of our ancestors in this really artful way that they're able to describe succinctly this complicated water cycle. It has it all from the evaporation, the precipitation from the, about surface water, groundwater, in this really beautiful poem. And this phrase, he uia he ninau, e uia kona au ia oi ai hea kawaya kane, ties the whole piece together as it answers that question in all the different places that you find this life-giving water of Kane. So I wanted to start here with the water itself. What is wayakane? What is water? It's sacred. Water is an akua, which is often translated as a god, but can also be understood as elemental beings that induce life, that create the conditions necessary for life, that life could not exist without, essentially. And so there are many aqua besides Kane, who many of us know, that take body forms of water, like on Mauna Kea, Lilinoi, Poliahu, Waiau, snow, rain, river, many things. Water is sacred in the sense that you see it used ceremonially for offerings, but water is also an everyday kind of mundane thing. We use it, of course, for drinking, bathing, cooking, but also just for fun, and even for things like flushing the toilet. So there's a wide gamut, and that's why this issue is so powerful, is it's very personal, but it's also existential. So we're hoping we can kind of reach to the bounds of that today. And with that, let's get into it. So today we're only going to be able to look at the very last section of this chant. So the section right before talks about the water above, and so now we're going to go to the water below. And it really is the perfect framing, powerful framing for the issue for the water contamination at Red Hill. And so it asks, where is the water of Kane, this life-giving water? And it says it's below in the earth, the water that bursts forth, the water that was placed by Kane, Kanaloa, spring water, water to drink, water that imbues life, water that imbues mana. And then it says, in life, that's where the water of Kane is. And so, when I thought about this section of this chant, it's been a really powerful time touchstone and grounding chant for me, to put forth, the way that things should be and the way that one day things hopefully will be again, to affirm that this is the natural order of things. And so it's really useful in that way. So I want to talk a little bit about the area that we're talking about. So the traditional name for quote-unquote Red Hill is Kapūkaki. Mahalo to Ke Poʻokeli Paʻakawa for this map. It's a little bit, you have to kind of bend your brain a little bit. So this blue area is actually the aquifer. So it is land. You can see it in this sort of inset, the area that we're looking at. And that red circle Mauka is the location of the Red Hill fuel tanks. And I really appreciate this map because you can also see below here these orange sections, and it's a little bit harder to see. These yellow sections represent both former and existing fish ponds. And so you can see the way that the underground aquifer fed these fish ponds, which fed the people. We'll say that fed the fish ponds, which fed the fish, which fed the people that lived all around Keawalau o Pu'uloa. And so similarly, you can see kind of intuitively why this would not be a wise place to store jet fuel. And so this is, when we think about possible impacts of this water contamination, it's all of these life systems in addition to, the municipal water supply, as if that wasn't serious enough. But so traditionally, these waters fed not only fish ponds, but also lo'i and springs for drinking water. And the area was known for bountiful limu, pearl oysters, which were a food source, not really valued for their pearls, is my understanding. Ava type of fish, a specific kind of kalo, kai kalo, as well as ava. And all of those things very directly need fresh water to exist and to thrive. So without this life-giving water, life in this area would not be what it was known to be. And so when we say ole I kawai, when you hear that phrase over and over, at different events and messaging around this issue, we mean all of this, all of this life that is made possible by this water. And it's not just our kupuna or, Kānaka Maoli that understand water in this way, this particular water. This area in 1987 was actually designated by the federal government, who, in agreement with our understanding, the EPA designated this area as a sole source aquifer, which means that it supplies at least 50% of the drinking water for the area above the aquifer. But more specifically, it means that there's no alternative sources that could reasonably be supplied for this area, and therefore needs, should have utmost protection. Unfortunately, this designation in 1987 came almost 50 years after the Navy had already constructed these giant fuel tanks, which are now the source of contamination of this water. So let's talk about that a little bit. So in the early 1940s, these giant fuel tanks were constructed under Kapūkaki. They took 3 years to build, and 16 people died in their construction. They're ginormous. So let's look at this graphic here, and mahalo nui to Wayne Tanaka from Sierra Club for this graphic. So it's using the state capitol here for a reference. So that's about 100 feet tall, which is the distance between the bottom of the tanks and our groundwater. And then this groundwater is what is then pumped into wells, which is what provides our municipal drinking water. So you can see, just as a size reference, if this is 100 feet, this is how large the 250-foot tanks are. And so Aloha Tower can actually fit inside of each one of these tanks, and there are 20. So just to get a sense of the scale. So each one can hold 12.5 million gallons. And so it's not being run at full capacity now, but if it was able to, it could hold 250 million gallons of jet fuel or other petroleum products. Right now there are 14 quote unquote active tanks holding over 100 million gallons of fuel. And you know, they're 80 years old and they're very badly corroded. And the Navy, in one of its own reports, estimated that about 5,000 gallons of fuel just is leaking every year from chronic little, you know, pukas here and there, from just corrosion over time, which I don't know, they don't seem to think is a problem. And that doesn't have anything to do with these kind of catastrophic leaks, you know, that will make headlines from time to time, like the most recent one back in 2021. And so 8 of these tanks haven't been inspected in over 20 years, and 3 of them in almost 40 years, 3 of those 8. And so when we think about this concept of water as life, I find it helpful to think, you know, conversely, that this fuel is death. When you think about, you know, well, of course, on a basic level, if you ingest fuel, that it's poisonous and will kill you if you drink enough. But also, you know, the way that this fuel is extracted, the way that it was brought to Hawaiʻi, wars fought over oil, the use of this fuel in perpetuating war and militarism, but also in its contribution to climate change, which is really important as we are probably facing water shortages and outages, mandatory conservation restriction because of this contamination. We should also remember that the changing climate is also affecting, you know, our rainfall, and that they're anticipating it's going to be drier in coming years because of that. So it's been helpful for me to hold those two concepts together next to each other. Water is life and fuel is death. So, you know, this facility has a long history of spilling, basically from the very beginning. In its first 10 years of life, there was a spill because there was an earthquake, which could happen again. But yeah, over its 80-year lifespan, there's been 76 documented leaks, probably other undocumented leaks, that are estimated to be at about 180,000 gallons of fuel. In 1978, Senator Inouye was already warning of possible groundwater contamination. This picture here shows core samples, so rock samples that were taken from underneath 20 of the tanks, and 19 of the 20 were stained with petroleum. So there's the tank, there's this rock material around it, and the water is, and we're right there. There's, you know, the water is 100 feet below. So the fact that these are stained are very concerning. And so that was 20 years ago. That was 1998 to 2002 were those studies. And this image comes from a Board of Water Supply PowerPoint from 2016 that was shared at a public meeting. And then from the same PowerPoint, it talks about in 2010, there was an audit by the Navy, or I'm sorry, an audit of the Navy that said that there was groundwater contamination because of irregular maintenance and insufficient inspection. So we've already known that the actual operations of the facility also have not been good. And then, of course, in 2014 was the big spill that brought a lot of this into the public light. So this facility wasn't declassified until 1995. So a lot of the things that happened, it seems like it was not publicly known. But in 2014, there was this large spill of 27,000 gallons of water, of jet fuel into our water. And next, we're going to look a little bit at some impacts of that. And I just want to warn folks that this next slide is like kind of shocking. So, just take a moment. So this graph comes from that same PowerPoint, that 2016 Board of Water Supply PowerPoint. And as you can see on the bottom, you'll see a green line and a red line. And so these are two levels that the Department of Health uses to mark gross contamination and toxicity caused by jet fuel. So basically, if things are above this line, the water source is considered grossly contaminated or contaminated to a toxic level. And as you can see, this graph shows from 2005. This blue line represents total petroleum hydrocarbons, which is petroleum products in this water. And you can see from 2005, it never measured below this level set by the Department of Health, which is very concerning. You can see here that this is where that large 27,000 gallon leak happened. And what's really interesting and devastating, really, to me, is that after they drained the tanks, the contamination level doesn't come back down, meaning that the contamination is already in the water. It's not, from an active spill necessarily. These really high numbers here. This is 6,500. The toxic level, the level when the Department of Health would need to take action is at 190, and this is 6,500. And this was measured after these tanks were empty for over 18 months, which I think is really important to remember in this moment, as the Navy is saying that they will drain these tanks. It's just important to remember that doesn't mean that the contamination is done, because there is harm that has already happened from many years. And so there's a plume of contaminated water and fuel that's under there that, moves around. So these numbers are taken from a monitoring well. And so, that contaminated plume moves away and moves towards. And so these are the numbers they measured on a particular day when they took a sample from that particular well. Just to make it a little bit more clear, this is where this monitoring well is. So it's monitor well number 2. And you can see here 6,500 parts per billion TPH diesel. And this well here, this blue one, is the Navy Red Hill shaft. This is the first shaft that they shut down in November due to the fuel contamination. So at this time in 2016, the water in that well was only at 21 parts per billion, so well below the 190 parts per billion set by the Department of Health. But the monitoring well close to tank number 5, which is where that large spill happened, was at 6,500. So I just wanted to show this so people can understand how can it be that they say that there's groundwater contamination and still trust that the drinking water is safe. This is how. It's like the actual contamination has not yet been pulled up into the drinking water well until this past November. And this is why the Board of Water Supply proactively shut down some of the drinking water wells so that they wouldn't pull that contamination up into it. And so, this is, of course, most of us are aware what happened this past May and November. So there was a large spill that entered directly into the Red Hill shaft, and this system served over 93,000 people, single-family homes and as well as schools. 5,000 people presented for medical screening for these various ailments. Over 8,000 military affected families. This count doesn't include impacted civilians, like the folks that live at Kapūkaki beach homes and other areas. And then so, long story short, at the end of this, after a lot of public pressure, like from folks like those on this panel today, the Department of Health finally orders the Navy to defuel Red Hill. So this is, turning back to what's going on at the water after this happens. If you recall, that 1987 designation of this area as a sole aquifer, it means that there's one water source for this whole area. And one way that was explained to me was to think of it like shave ice, that the rock, is like the ice, and the water, or unfortunately in this situation, the contamination, is like the syrup. And as Ernie Lau was saying, it's like two straws in one cup, meaning the Board of Water Supply well and the Navy wells are like two straws, but they're going into the same cup. And I say into the same shave ice. And so it's on November 28th, the Navy shuts down Red Hill, but doesn't tell anybody that they did that. And the reason why that's really important is if you think about sharing a shave ice with somebody, if you're both drinking at the same time, there's some pressure that's kind of holding the syrup both to both sides of your cup. But if somebody stops drinking on one side and you keep drinking on your side, it's going to pull that syrup, or in this case contamination, possibly towards your side. And so it was really kind of messed up. The Navy didn't tell the Board of Water Supply that they had shut off their shaft. And so BWS finds out about this 5 days later, pretty much along with everybody else, on December 2nd, and so they quickly decide to shut down Halava shaft. And so that particular shaft was providing 10 million gallons a day, which is about 20% of the water for urban Honolulu. Sorry, there's the second straw. And then, about a week later, it happens again where the Navy shuts off another one because they disclose the contamination of another shaft. That's the Navy Aya Halava shaft, and still Board of Water Supply turns off their Halava and Aya wells, and those together provide almost 2 million gallons a day. And so this is the capacity that we're now having to make up for, and so Board of Water Supply is pumping on their other sources in order to make up for that loss, that almost 12 million gallons a day, which is really irritating. That in the meantime, the Navy, sorry, I think my video is blocking this, but in the meantime, the Navy is using 5 million gallons a day to flush their system, which is not clear that it would work. As my friend said, have you ever tried to wash a patele stew container with cold water? No, doesn't do anything. Like, that's, it's doubtful that would work, but they're just flushing 5 million gallons of fresh water every day, which is quite concerning considering, the larger picture of things and this likely need for conservation down the line. So, the takeaway from this whole thing is that we cannot trust the Navy with our Hawaiʻi, and if we understand that water is life, it follows that we cannot trust the Navy with our lives either. With this water is our life. So I just wanted to go over a few examples of why we shouldn't trust the Navy. They're saying that they're going to shut down this facility, why we can't take them at their word, how they've shown their poor record of behavior. So not sure if folks are familiar with the term gaslighting, but the Navy are champion gaslighters. It comes from a film called Gaslight, where a husband manipulates his wife into thinking she's crazy by dimming all of the lights in their house and telling her she's hallucinating. So gaslighting is where you make, it's a form of psychological abuse where you make a person or a group of people question their perception of reality. And the Navy is really good at that. So I just wanted to give a little short chronology of their back and forth, where initially when the Department of Health comes out with their order that the Navy needs to defuel, the Navy immediately says that they're going to fight it administratively in a contested case, which is shameful. I think, you should be apologetic and, leading the charge to fix it. But no, they're going to fight administratively about that. And then they lose January 3rd. They say, nope, sorry, Navy, we're going to uphold this order. You need to comply. And About a week later, they say, yes, we're going to comply with the order. We're going to defuel, which conveniently came, the day that they're going to be in front of Congress. And they announce, we promise we're going to comply. And then just a few weeks later, they announce that they're going to sue the state over this executive order. It's back and forth. And then, fast forward to March, and they suddenly announce that they're going to shut down the facility that they've been saying forever and ever is too essential to close. And now their messaging is clearly this is not the best place to store fuel, which is not what they've been saying for 80 years. And so the other reason why we cannot take the Navy at their word when they talk about shutting down this facility is their chronic incompetence and arrogance. So I'm just going to run through a few. Right before this big water contamination issue happened in November, just a month before, they were fined $325,000 for all kinds of violations at the facility. Pretty basic stuff. I can include a link so you can see what those were for. And then on November 28th, people start complaining of feeling sick of the smell of the fuel. And the Navy tells everybody that the water is safe, even though the day before they had suspended operations at Red Hill and not told anybody. Even though they already had test results from months before showing those TPH levels spiking. And by the time they turned it over to the Department of Health, they had come back down. So the Department of Health wasn't clear what to do. They had asked for more information, and then boom, it hit. People were complaining about symptoms already. So, then, okay, it's confirmed. There's the drinking water is contaminated for the Navy. And what do? The Department of Health issues this advisory telling people do not flush this contaminated water into storm drains. And essentially telling people also don't drink the water because, the Navy was kind of slow on that. But anyway, sorry, this is a different one. They tell everybody, do not flush this contaminated water. And what does the Navy do? They start flushing this water straight onto the street, straight into storm drains, which goes out to the ocean. Just completely arrogant and, disregarding this order from the Department of Health. And then, about a month later, it comes out that this fuel leaked directly into the well from a pipeline. It's a drain pipe that the Navy didn't even know existed until somebody went back and looked at the original schematics from 1941, and they noticed that there's this drain pipe that's supposed to collect just naturally occurring condensation to go into that well. They didn't know it existed, and that's how they're saying the fuel entered into this well. Terrifying. And then lastly, the example I wanted to say was that Kaikahele had requested the security footage to see what the heck happened, because there's so much, conflicting stories. And conveniently, the security cameras were disconnected. They said from an error from a contractor had accidentally cut an electrical line. So none of the security cameras in the relevant areas were functioning. Which to me, it's like if you can't function, or if you can't operate security cameras adequately, then you probably shouldn't be in charge of 100 million gallons of fuel above our drinking water. So that was a lot, and that was probably longer than I should have spoken. But this is why it's important that we keep up the pressure. There's something for everyone. I think we're going to get into a little bit more specifics of how you can join in later on in this panel. But you can sign up to join us at this link, bit.ly/redhillvolunteer. Thank you so much for your time. Aloha.
Thank you so much, Shelley, for the background. My biggest takeaway, I think, is that there's still a lot of different aspects of this that there are misconceptions, such as things about the aquifer and why exactly this aquifer is so important. I think it was early this year, we heard some folks on the congressional level ask about whether or not we could draw from other aquifers, whether there were alternative aquifers. And all those questions essentially like miss the point about why this issue is so grave and immensely threatening to our lives here. No way, Shelley. Hope you can still hear us and plug into the conversation. But yeah, I think what we essentially also want to do is like debunk a lot of the myths that have really shaped the narrative around Red Hill. And some of the things that Shelley raises also kind of reminds us that it's already a crisis that we're facing. It's not just something that's far off now, like the worst nightmare is here, and we need to do something about it. And yeah, and so thank you, Mahalo Shelley, for giving us that background. So in order to speak to the coalition building theme for today's talk story, I also wanted to ask Rebekah, who has been played a really integral role in building coalition around Red Hill. If there was anything you wanted to add to build off of the points that Shelley shared.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks so much, Shelley. Really appreciate your presentation. I know you put a lot of time in that, so it's all good, man. Really love those slides, and I also concur. Cannot trust the military with the water or our lives. And so just real quick before we get into kind of some of the meatier questions, just wanted to say, what is still happening and what is inspiring is to watch as consciousness grows. Just as the pandemic has revealed, the waters of Kapūkaki are proving that we're all interconnected. Whether you're on the left or the right, or your left or your right, however it works out in Zoom land, or you just don't recognize as legitimate any of those settler colonial structures, we cannot live without water. None of us can survive without water. So just as much as we have to show up for the water, we also have to show up for one another. So whether you're a settler or indigenous, it is the water that is growing this movement of solidarity. And that's super inspiring, and it's also really beautiful. So thank you so much, Anna.
Thanks, Becca. Yeah, so as this crisis kind of continues to unfold and all these like impacts that we don't even know yet are kind of looming over our heads, one thing that is constantly on my mind, I'm sure many of your minds, is all the things that we don't know yet, like all the unknown impacts of this contamination. And regardless of what the DoD announced this week, we know that even after the tanks are defueled, which notably we still can't even say that's something that's going to happen for sure, we will likely face the brunt of this catastrophe for like at least a decade and possibly decades to come, because the groundwater, as Shelley mentioned in her amazing presentation, is already contaminated, and the substrate below the Red Hill facility has already been saturated with fuel. And so just this morning, as Shelley mentioned, the Board of Water Supply put out an urgent call for voluntary water conservation on Oahu, and it's seeking a 10% reduction in water usage. And so I'm wondering if you folks can share and go into some of the long-term impacts that this crisis will have on the environment in our communities on Oahu and in Hawaii.
I can start because I feel like what I was thinking about is at the intersection of what you both were talking about, Anna and Becca, because in terms of just centering the water, like Becca was saying, and Anna, what you were saying about like just the vastness about what we don't even know, because one thing I've been trying to think about, and which like this week's news is really forcing us to think about now, is just long-term impact on the aquifer itself. And so the movement thus far has been organized around the facility, really like shutting down the facility in a lot of ways, since shut down Red Hill is like the most kind of common heard refrain. And of course, like you said, this hasn't actually happened yet, but this is a crucial moment for us to like, well, one, keep the momentum going so that it actually is shut down. And then two, to think about what needs to be done beyond the permanent shutdown of the facility. And actually one of our fellow members in Oahu Water Protectors, Gina Hara, has been reminding us of this for weeks, right? Like, what if we were organized around the aquifer instead of Red Hill, the facility? Because even with this news about or the news that we're just like cautiously optimistic about with the shutdown is just the very beginning of, like you were saying, Anna, a much longer road to demand, remediation or reparations for the contamination of the aquifer. And it brings up this question of how is the Navy going to correct this crisis that they created? But like you're saying too, we also don't even know the full contours of the crisis or even the history of the facility. But we do know people were made sick. We do know there will be environmental consequences, even though there's so much we don't know about flushing and what's going to happen to Halawa Stream, or even just like the ocean, because the Navy was flushing the water into storm drains. And we don't even know if there will be fuel releases that happen between now and when the facility is actually defueled. And so it's like, how can we demand remediation and reparations for something that's yet to come, or what we don't even know? And I'm struggling with the word reparations because it's brings up money in a lot of, like, historically so. And there's a lot that money can do, but what it cannot do. And as Shelley was saying, and as Anna's saying, there's no price tag on the aquifer, it's irreplaceable. Though I want to be clear that my hesitation around reparations doesn't mean like the Navy's off the hook or anything. They need to be held accountable, period. And I also don't want to be like minimizing the importance of compensation, especially for, impacted families or schools that have been covering costs out of their own budget and haven't been reimbursed by the Navy. But I think like thinking about the aquifer, thinking about cleanup, it's kind of this larger question about how we pursue justice, and like not just what it looks like, but what does it feel like for us? Because I've been constantly thinking about something Mari Matsuda said kind of earlier on in December, and she said, that at the end of the day, I want to trust the water in the glass that I hand to someone that I love, and that's something that's priceless, and that money can't do. It's priceless. That's what, anyway, I will stop there. So thanks.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I'll speak a little bit more broadly. As a community of people who call Oahu home, again, whether you're indigenous or settler, we all bear witness to the abundance of lies the military has fed, not just to us, but their own personnel, right? So the military will continue to feed us lie after lie after lie. It's part of their past. I'm sure it's part of their future. And so for me, even though I come from a military family, I will never trust the military again. Instead, we have to trust each other, because to them, all of us are nothing more than collateral damage. If we're nothing more than collateral damage to the military, then they really don't give a shit about our bodies and our minds and how we're cared for. And thinking more about how we care for bodies and minds, Honolulu isn't just a medical hub for Southern Oahu and the entire island, but all of the archipelago and the wider Pacific. Folks come here to receive specialized care. And in many instances, Pacific Islanders come to Honolulu to receive medical care because of the cancers and other ailments brought on because of violent militarization and horrific experiments done throughout Oceania by the US military. I'm thinking specifically about the Marshall Islands and also Guam. So as our Auntie Linnell reminds us, our badass Auntie Linnell, who's doing excellent work up in North Shore and is part of our coalition, which we'll get to in just a second, she reminds us that you cannot care for patients without clean water. So these military lies, negligence, and incompetence are really so much more far-reaching than just Southern Oahu. They spread out into the Pacific, and I would argue go worldwide. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Rebekah and Sam. Yeah, and to that, I think highlighting what Stanford's saying in the chat about it being impossible to clean up the aquifer and the things that the Navy hasn't said that they should be saying. I think the buildup of all these half-truths or straight up lies, as Rebekah said, is also a way to quell the fight that is happening in the movement that's growing. And so I think it's really up to us to keep staying strong in our demands and making sure that they follow through what they have to do and what we deserve. So these impacts that you folks shared are really vital because we need to be prepared essentially for what's to come for decades, for generations that come after us. And I think these impacts also kind of remind us that of the urgency that's needed to shut down this monster of a facility in less than 12 months, or I guess 14 and a half, seeing as their report says it's next May. But yeah, it absolutely cannot take more than 12 months or 12 months. And over the years, and especially over the past few months, you know, this shut down Red Hill slogan has become almost a symbolic phrase of this unified struggle, and it's definitely become a personal mantra for me. And I think despite the fact that we can all agree on why this facility needs to be permanently decommissioned, I was wondering also if folks, if you guys would want to expand on the impacts of actually shutting down the facility, speaking to what Rebekah said about, and Sam said about, you know, solidarity, and in all the other places that have been contaminated by the US military. How will shutting down Red Hill reverberate throughout communities here in Hawaii and around the world, and what kind of precedent will this set? I'm hoping that Shelley can hear us too.
Hi guys, sorry, my internet is terrible. I hope I don't like repeat with what folks have already said. But yeah, definitely the water shortages that seem, you know, on the horizon here. One of our
Oh no, Shelley, you're cutting off. I wish we could hear her because I know she has some awesome things to say about this. Becca and Sam, would you guys wanna jump in the meantime? Sorry, Shelley.
sorry, this keeps kicking me off. Wayne is recommending I try and get on here on my phone. I might do that instead. Sorry, I don't want to get on ice. You know, we're hopeful that this could be maybe the first domino to fall in this broad so how hard the Navy was fighting to vital, and then they're like, Korea is not the place to put tanks, and it's like, oh really? Because that's not what you've been saying for you know, decades. So for example, on the water contamination is a great example of that. So we're hoping that this win can be the
Oh man, sorry everyone. Sorry, Shelley. Showing us in case anyone didn't catch what Shelley was saying, I'll just echo a little bit of her words. I hope she can come back and expand on what she said, because I think it's really important. The points that Shelley's sharing about how this will be the first fall of the domino of US militarization across the world, and its impacts will be transnational, transoceanic, and it will really, you know, set a precedent for all the contamination and destruction that the US military inflicts in Hawaii and across the world. So yeah, I really hope she can come back and expand on it, because it's important, I think, that we talk about the impacts of actually shutting down Red Hill and how it'll, affect everyone across the world, and how it liberates so many communities across the world. And so I think from this conversation about impacts and everything that everyone has shared so far, we can see that Red Hill is really an impetus to realizing and connecting a wide range of systemic and structural issues. And so to expand on that and to expand on impacts, what are some aspects of this issue that Becca, you and Sam think that we should be talking about more, whether it's just in organizing that we're doing around this, or in the media and beyond?
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for that question. I think something that, or like talking more about, or just being mindful of, especially in light of like the news of permanent shutdown of the facility now, is relocation. Relocation, and maybe like how that dovetails with a conversation about international solidarity. Because up until this point, I hope folks know that like we haven't been alone in this. There's not just people all over the world, there's people all over the world, and especially in the Pacific, well, one, sadly, that are also subjected to military violence and occupation, who are also fighting for justice against military pollution. And they're watching what's happening with Red Hill, and they've been in solidarity with us, people in Guahan, in Okinawa, in Jeju, also the continental US. They've all taken the time to learn about Red Hill. It's resonated with what they've gone through and are still going through where they live. And I think as sad and devastating as it is to know about that, it's also really beautiful, the solidarity. And, it's, as probably all of us here know, this kind of environmental damage is not a coincidence of military occupation, but it's guaranteed. And it's not just like similar resonances, but it's actually like a material chain of militarism that such that, there's the shuffling of military infrastructure across the Pacific. And so with relocation, like now being a topic of conversation, we need to advocate as hard as possible to make sure that this fuel isn't just dumped somewhere else and endangers another community, especially, just because, all of us have our own different kinds of ties to other places in the Pacific and whatnot. And so this concession is, on the one hand, people have been using the language of victory and whatnot, or a win. And it kind of at least reminded me of something that Kyle Kajihiro has kind of talked about with Kaho'olawe, right? In 1994, after like years and years and years of struggle, the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana won the return of the island of Kaho'olawe to be held in a trust. But at the same time, that huge victory was kind of offset by subsequent military land acquisitions. And so this is a really tenuous moment for us to hopefully like leverage Red Hill and all the kind of feelings that newfound feelings of distrust people have in the military, maybe not newfound for everyone, but newfound for some people for sure. These distrust in the military, and hopefully this can like build and sustain some momentum with the 2029 military leases and stuff like RIMPAC. And anyway, sorry, I'm kind of talking, I kind of went off a little bit, but we need to think about relocation. We need to make sure it's not endangering other people, and thinking ahead too, so that Red Hill doesn't become an occasion for more military expansion in Hawaii or the Pacific.
Definitely. Thank you so much for saying that, Sam. Agree with you 100% on all of that. And, something that I've been, hinting at throughout this discussion, is the importance of positionality and critically engaging with how we relate to one another. Sometimes we got to have those hard and uncomfortable, really uncomfortable discussions around whiteness and settler colonial structures. And when I say we, I don't just mean a diverse group of racialized communities, but white folks too, specifically need to better engage and understand how whiteness operates within and outside of white communities. And so this kind of brings us back to thinking about kuleana and responsibility. You know, if you're a water drinker and you call Oahu home, which I think is a lot of us here today, you have a responsibility, not just to Kapūkaki, but everybody else. For white folks, especially those who may have moved to Hawaii from the continent and never received any history about the violences of Kānaka dispossession, and who are now just stepping into this new understanding of this place and your role in it, you might be afraid or even apprehensive about how to get involved. You might feel shame. You might feel guilt. You might feel very overwhelmed about your own ignorance. And it is likely that you've made some pretty dumb haole mistakes in the past. I know this is true because I've also experienced it. But I just really want to emphasize that don't let that paralyze you into inaction, right? That's the worst that could happen. Instead, show up, listen. Cannot emphasize enough how important it is to just listen, learn, and perhaps most importantly, have an open heart. Just remember, responsibility is never frozen in time. Responsibility grows and responsibility shifts. So we're really going to need each other. It's a long road ahead. We've got, however, it's going to be, they're projecting 14 months. We're really hoping for less. But nevertheless, it's going to be a long road ahead and really going to need to show up for one another. Pass it back over to Anna now.
Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Sam. I think, wow, yeah, I think those are extremely important like things to highlight, especially like in general. I think our society is very focused on reaction and being reactive. And Red Hill is absolutely highlighting, especially for me on an individual level, like the importance of proactivity and relating to a place and your responsibility in it, and to show up for movements and fights and struggles for justice and liberation, and highlighting, you know, what folks in the chat are saying as well, Pete, Stanford, and Chris, and Mahalo for sharing your thoughts on this, because absolutely, I think it's also an understanding of power dynamics. You know, is what I'm getting from Sam and Becca's thoughts is also like the relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed, and the objectification and exploitation of places that is seen as expendable or disposable to the eyes of the US military. And I think that's exactly what's been happening with Red Hill for, I mean, I personally never saw the day that they would say shut down. But I think even it's odd because even after they said that, it doesn't sit right? It doesn't feel as though it's something that we're championing, because it took so much destruction and death and pain for them to utter those words without even any confirmation that they're going to actually do so. So despite all of that and doom and gloom and the pain and the hurt that comes with militarization, with Red Hill is also such an important connecting point with de-mill struggles, deoccupation, environmental justice, social justice, economic justice. And I think what's been so beautiful to see is the organic growth of this movement. And it's absolutely growing, and we're definitely here to stay. And this decision that DOD made and the political shift that's been happening is attributed to the thousands of hours that have been spent taking action from everyone in the community, and the conversations that have been had, and the emotional labor that's been put into organizing on the ground. And so I wanted to ask you folks, and I'm also echoing Christina's question. Thank you so much for your question about how we went about building this coalition and galvanizing community support for this cause. How has the movement to protect Kapūkaki grown? And both of you I've just been seeing you folks doing amazing work. So yeah, what is your take on that?
I can start us off thinking about the coalition. You know, Anna and I have been doing a lot of really hard work around growing the base for the coalition. So, you know, if you're interested in joining our coalition, if you are affiliated with a specific organization, email Anna or I with your name and your organizational affiliation. We'll make sure that you get into our email thread, and you'll be included in our our meetings. We're also looking to plan different actions to strengthen the solidarity within the coalition. And so speaking of actions, we are planning a decentralized action for World Water Day. That's March 22nd. So whether you're here on Oahu or somewhere throughout the archipelago, maybe some other Pacific islands or even on the continent, we're really looking to build solidarity with folks on the continent and other islands as well. We're just asking for, on that day, whatever it is you want to do, whether it's just yourself or you got a group of friends, you want to do your own sign waving or a little march or dying, whatever it is, just kind of snap a selfie and then tag us at the Oahu Water Protectors, Sierra Club Hawaiʻi, or Hawaii Peace and Justice. And we really want to see how, this movement is spreading out. And, whether you're working with protecting water or thinking about larger demilitarization or decolonial struggles, or whether it's protecting sacred sites, we'd love if you would tag us in those postings as well, because we'd really like to make stronger connections. And I can go on about the coalition, but I also want to leave a little room for Anna and if Sam wants to plug in. But thank you, Christina, for your question, and thank you for your awesome reporting. We're all really rooting for you. Sam, you want to jump in?
I feel like you and Anna are the two conveners of the coalition, so I'll let Anna go, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. And then feel free to add in Sam. I'm not sure if Shelley's back. I think she is. But I also want to give Shelley some time to add into points that she wanted to share as well. But yeah, in terms of galvanizing the community and how we went about building the coalition, I think I mentioned earlier, it was like very organic. A lot of it came about from conversations that everyone's been having, like not just Becca and I, like everyone in the community and everyone organizing. And it's just a butterfly effect kind of thing. And so, we were, reaching out to folks who are in OWP and beyond, asking them, are you part of an organization? Do you know someone's part of an organization? Do they want to join in? What is their take on Red Hill? And also a lot of people were reaching out to us and saying, like, we want to do something. How can we contribute? How can we join this fight? And so a lot of it's also just been people like waking up and rising up to join in, and realizing that we all kind of have a collective role in it. But yeah, and I think Shelley's back. So I wanted to give Shelley some space too to talk about that movement growing. And yeah. Oh, sorry, Shelley, 1 second. I think we need to make Shelley a host. Possibly.
Sorry, everybody. This is like the worst tech experience ever. And now I feel like I better say something really, really valuable, which I'm not sure that I have. I was just going to say that, even if you're not a member of a formal organization, there's tons of things still to be done. Water is such like the perfect thing to unite around, because it's something that is so personal, but it's also something that we like all, it's something that's so big and something that's so personal. And so just staying engaged, diving deep in the research, having conversations with people that like those are people I'll probably never know. If is a small group of people, like not an org, you can be a family or whatever. If you can get folks together and you want someone to give you a presentation, we can find somebody to do that for sure. We've done canvassing to businesses, which was pretty fun, that are probably going to be struck by these water conservation measures in the summer, to put up our posters and stuff. That was super fun. If you want to do more of that, what else? Oh, letter writing, we talk about that. Yeah, so I mean, you can really get creative with what you want to do. There's a place for everybody. Yeah.
Thank you, Shelley. Yeah, no, that's extremely important point about everyone having a role and special talent and skill they can contribute. And I think so, also speaking to Danny's question about main pushes in terms of action items that we can plug in our communities. I think Shelley mentioned really, really good ones that we've been doing. And also I think we're still continuing the calls to action about showing up in your communities, talking to your friends and family, organizing things in your own communities, getting out flyers and posters. And we're also trying to open up that resource for folks to have access to posters and all that in a more like streamlined way. So definitely keep in touch with us and let us know what you need. We're still plugging pledges and petitions that have been going around, and that Jose will share a list of after today's talk story. But yeah, and sorry, Sam, did you also want to share any action items?
I think just, or I think you all covered it. I think one last thing is that HPJ, or Hawaii Peace and Justice, is fundraising by, I don't know if you all can see, if my Zoom box is too tiny. We have these beautiful Shut Down Red Hill posters that you can hang up in your Zoom background or in your office, or if you on your door, or wherever you work, or just like at home or something, or on your front door. You can laminate it and put it on your lawn. There are lots of uses for it. So I think that'll be pasted in the chat as well if you want to get your hands on one of these larger posters as well. I think that's it.
Yes, Sam has been doing an awesome job like distributing these posters and setting up pickups. So yeah, it's amazing. And yeah, I think in terms of coalition building, movement building, I mean, there's so much more to say, and just seeing folks like just go out and doing their own thing, like Auntie Anel just holding the ground over in North Shore. I think like a lot of times like we don't even need to say anything for people to feel like driven to go do something, just because it's such, as Shelley said, a personal thing. And when water is at threat, I think we're all kind of like agitated enough to do something about it. So yeah, I hope that kind of touches on the coalition stuff. I also wanted to acknowledge the question from Chris about if we can't trust the military with fuel, how can we trust them with the operation of the 10 to 20 nuclear reactors that power their submarines? How long until we experience a radioactive leak into our groundwater? Really great question. Yeah, Sam, Becca, and Shelley, would you guys like to share thoughts on that?
No, just that I don't trust them. To your question, how can we trust them to run their nuclear reactors? Do not trust them to run those nuclear reactors either.
Yeah, I'll just say I don't trust them with that. I don't trust them with the water. I just don't trust them at all. The position of Hawaii Peace and Justice is to demilitarize Hawaii, to get the military out. I don't know if that sounds radical to folks, but that's a call that's been going out throughout the Pacific and the Caribbean, from Vieques to Kaʻolave to Guahan to Jeju to Okinawa, not to just move these problems to other areas or relocate bases or relocate facilities, but to just fucking demilitarize the world. That's our position.
Yeah, thank you, folks. Sam, did you want to add something?
Or no, just like, yeah, same. I definitely wouldn't trust them with nuclear reactors or just generally with anything. And it's not just like, and like Becca was saying, it's not just in Hawaii where they've lied and have like just shown over and over how incompetent and just what a bunch of clowns run their circus. But everywhere they hide, they don't disclose anything. They hide pipeline flaws. They don't. So yeah, no trust for them ever.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. I think that's also why we need to like keep going, and like this decision that they made, or in the announcement that they made, I should say, doesn't actually mean anything until something actually happens. One thing to know is that two things is that the DoD has still yet to withdraw their appeals to the state Department of Health emergency order in the state and federal courts. The Navy has also not withdrawn their underground storage tank permit application. on the state level. And so we're giving them some time, maybe like at most a week to do so, to prove that they're truly going to walk the talk. And until then, and after that, we're still gonna keep on keeping on to make sure that defueling and shutting down actually happens, and that the remediation that needs to happen happens, the compensation, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I recognize that it's 5:06. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. As I mentioned, we can stay a little bit on to talk story with everyone, to answer more questions. But I really just want to say a huge thank you to everyone for being here, for our amazing Wahine panelists, for sharing your thoughts. I think I always feel very regenerated talking to you folks about this movement and how organizing is really the solution to shutting down Red Hill and beyond. So thank you all so much. And we'll keep in touch. Jose, again, will send out a list of action steps, and we'll also send out a recording of the webinar. And I believe we can also share the PowerPoint, which unfortunately Shelley couldn't finish presenting. But yeah, thank you all so much for your time. And again, we'll stay on a little bit to answer more questions.
I'll just echo Anna. Thank you so much to my fellow panelists. Thank you to Anna and Jose for organizing all of this. Thank you to the audience for showing up and, being patient with us. We really appreciate you coming out today, and we look forward to future dialogues.
Yeah, same. It's great having colleagues so brilliant that I can just always be like, yeah, same, exact same thing they said. Thank you, everyone.
Well, I just want to say thank you, everybody. Thank you, Anna, Shelley, Sam, Rebekah, so much, Rebekah, for being here and providing us such a great, information. It's like a download of information on how to coalition build. I have to reiterate what Wayne said in the comments. You all are truly the unsung heroes behind the scenes. So thank you for all that you do and continue to do as you organize and create all these mechanisms for social change. So thank you also to our audience for coming together today for our Advocacy for Social Justice talk story. And all right, thank you again, everybody.
Thanks, Jose, for making this happen. I also see a question, if folks are still down to stay, from Chris about, and I see Chris is still here, so maybe we can address it. It's about, what is your argument for if the military leaves Hawaii, it will just get taken over by China or Russia? I've heard this a lot, and it's a hard argument to defeat. Really good question. I'm sure Shelley, Sam, and Rebekah have a lot of thoughts on that.
Shelley, you want to start us off?
Not really. I mean, what can you say? To me, it's like, we're all watching this like slow train wreck going down in Ukraine and Russia, and like the ugliness of war. Just thinking about when Pearl Harbor was bombed here, and the way that the military presence here puts a target on us, even though they spin it as that they're here to protect us, but they're the one that's creating that threat to us. And it's a difficult question because we're already living inside of the context of this occupation. So, them leaving, I'm not going to deny that I think that there's some, possible vulnerability there. I don't really have an answer. It's a huge systemic problem. Yeah, I don't know, that's not particularly satisfying, but war can only beget more war. Like at a point you need to like get off the merry-go-round that just keeps on manifesting more and more aggression. And it kills me that they use Hawaii to project war to other places, that they practice doing these things to other people here, and they use us in that way. It's like, it's not it's not okay. And they're saying that, you know, in exchange for that, they're offering us protection, and, you know, I think they're endangering us more than anything else.
Yeah,
I'll just add, you know, I think, you know, this is like this fear-based rhetoric. You know, I know that this has happened with, this was what people say, well, you're lucky, you know, because you'd be speaking Japanese if not for America, right? And so I think that this is really, it's more than just troubling. It's a way that is attempting to stifle our own imaginary about what could be. And I think that the only way to push against that is to just, you know, not give up. I don't know, keep having these conversations, be creative about the ways in which we're engaging with one another, and sharing and talking about difficult issues, and, you know, thinking more broadly about what types of solidarity we may be able to create. Again, I don't know if that's satisfying, because people will always try to scare us with like the what ifs, you know, but we can also be like, yeah, what if, what can be created when we're not so, you know, such fear isn't imposed on us, you know.
Yeah, man, thanks, Becca and Shelley. And I think, yeah, like the collective imagination that we need to defeat colonization and occupation essentially is also, you know, we also need to be debunking the fact that the United States uses the argument of colonization and occupation to justify their own occupation and colonization. And so like I think it's important that we don't fall into that trap. And like these rhetoric the rhetoric that you hear here, like if the military leaves Hawaii, you know, just get taken over by China, Russia, it was created by the US to justify their own colonization. So yeah, you need to go beyond that, and that's why we're here today. Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Chris, for being here. Yeah, I think did we cover all the questions, Jose?
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful.
I wonder if anyone from the audience has something they'd like to add to that, you know, or if you want to throw it in the chat, or if there are any other questions, let us know. We can hang out for a little bit more.
I mean, it's anyone in the audience, you should be able to unmute yourselves now if you like. Alejandra Rivas has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add on, mostly just reinforce what everyone else has been saying so like well and articulately. But yeah, I think really this whole argument that like, oh no, Russia or China is going to come and colonize, like that's such a red herring. Yeah. And it's just to like, you know, keep us in fear, which is kind of how empires work, right? And besides, I'm pretty sure Hawaii had like treaties or had documents signed from like almost every, you know, nation in the world that recognized its sovereignty before the US came and overthrew. And so like, I think they were fine before the US and they'll be fine afterwards, you know, like it's really just like, it kind of also, it's like, law, so you don't think Indigenous people can protect themselves kind of thing. Like, so yeah, that's all I had to add.
Thank you for that, Ale. If you guys don't know, Alejandra is one of the badass university organizers coming up, and she's been doing a lot of really awesome work with Anna. I'll pass it to Kim.
Thank you so much for the panel, everybody. Just to add on to that, you know, last question, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. This is such a smart panel. But I think that it's often that I'm going to a gendered analogy, I guess, you know, with it being an all women's panel, you know, for a long time we would think about the what a woman's life was. You know, you're 18 years old, you got to get married. what are you going to do with your life if you don't get married? You're going to be a great big loser, and anybody who tries to make that argument now is going to be laughed out of the room, right? And, and yet we use the same argument with island nations and smaller nations. Like, you have to be aligned with a violent empire. You have to be, what's your life going to be unless you have the protection of a violent empire? And I just think it's, especially with the climate crisis, like, all nations need to be united against the one enemy. And that's like, the planet is warming. That is what's facing all of us. It's a huge opportunity for us to bury our weapons and unite across borders, unite across ideologies, even if it seems impossible, like, otherwise we're all gonna, because the catastrophes awaiting us are the list is long. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Kim. I just wanted to give you a shout out. If you guys don't know, Kim's a badass professor, West Oahu. If you have a chance, take her class. She's part of the International Women's Network Against Militarism, and it's always fun to be around. Pete, you're up.
Hey, aloha mai kako. Apologies, I've been in and out of this conversation, but I've caught the end of it, and yeah, I'm feeling some of those comments about, well, in the context of Okinawa, you hear similar arguments. And, one thing that concerns me about Red Hill is why I feel less celebratory and more really concerned is like what happened to Okinawa. Their proposal to close down Futema Air Base was to build Henoko, you know what I mean? So just concern, we got to be vigilant on that. But in terms of the last conversations about, from an Okinawan perspective, it feels like there's been sometimes among the left, if you say something like criticize China, for example, sometimes there's a defensiveness, in terms of their right to sovereignty and their right to defend themselves and so forth. And, from an Okinawan perspective, it doesn't matter if it's American militarism, Japanese militarism, or Chinese militarism, it all kind of results in the same thing. And so I don't appreciate being put in a position to take a side. Too much of history has been coded in the last century anyway, is the great Axis versus the Allies, like these two sides. And they always overlook the non-aligned, not just the non-aligned nations and peoples, but, different entities, tribes, peoples not recognized that did not, we're not taking sides. And right now people are concerned about Taiwan that could turn Okinawa once again into a front line. And the irony is that when it was sovereign as the Ryukyu nation, the Ryukyu kingdom, that they demilitarized because they were surrounded by big militarized empires, right? And they know there was like no winning in that line, so they confiscated arms, swords, and I'm sure that was to quell uprisings too. But it was just to put forth like, hey, we're just going to trade with people and cultural exchange, and that's how we'll build our security, by having positive working relationships with our neighbors. And right now, the way it is with a militarized neighborhood, you know what I mean? This argument that peace through security, it hasn't brought us security. It's not it's not sustainable. So I will pass the mic. I don't want to take up too much time, but thanks so much for you guys. Mana'o there. Mahalo nui. Ola ikabai.
Thank you, Pete, always for your important, powerful words. Yeah, wow. I feel like we could go on forever about empire and how Red Hill is like, I don't know, it really exemplifies how all of it just needs to go. We just need to abolish everything. There's no way we're gonna like have collective liberation as long as the US military exists. So it's Oh, go ahead, Pete, go ahead.
Oh, I forgot one thing real quick too, and just to underscore, I was sick to my stomach when I heard Ed Case making this big bravado speech about Ukraine, you know, from Hawaii. You know, you want to talk about violating sovereignty. So that's when people are making those arguments, you know, that's why we're, you know, reminding them that we're speaking English in the middle of Polynesian. Okay, Malo.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Oh, okay, yes. Heavy conversations. Anyone else have any questions and thoughts?
Can I just add one thing to it? I really appreciate what Rebekah was saying about like the way that particular question, like Chris who asked the question was saying this is like one final gotcha that people like to tell him, people who generally aren't from Hawaii. And I really appreciated Becca's framing of like that kind of question, that kind of thinking forecloses like imagination. And a few years back, like this concept of kind of like this myth of inevitability and like how heavy it feels to just be like, oh, of course it's like that. It's the same thing, I guess, that Kim was talking to too. And then how powerful it is if you just smash that myth, you know, that once upon a time there was a different future felt very inevitable. And the reality that we're living in now seemed like, you know, a dystopian nightmare scenario. And just it's hard to get past that feeling of inevitability when you're inside of it. And that's been what's been kind of cool doing this work is to be with other people who see a different way forward. And so it feels less and less inevitable that this is the way it has to be. The thing that came to mind too is kind of counter to this idea of national security, you know, the other counter idea of genuine security, and folks talking about like just how fear-based that kind of thinking and question is. Like, but what about, you know, and then fill in the boogeyman that's coming. That's not genuine security. Like making decisions from a place of fear is, you know, not how I would like to move into the future. Yeah. Anyway, so those are the things that kind of cropped up listening to everybody talking here.
I love that, Shelley, about none of this was ever inevitable. Like, I think that really runs home or hits home, especially with Red Hill. Like at all these certain different points in like in the most recent of history, this didn't have to happen. This happened because precisely because people made specific decisions when at any other point they could have made the right decision. And I'm actually in like a Japanese Empire seminar reading group where that's all like the history books can be like really dense and long and just like overly detailed, but that's what some of them have mapped out. Like, well, at every point, like there was a imperial bureaucrat who made these series of decisions that didn't have to be inevitable, just like gives a face to a larger structure like empire. And I think even just like our own, and not just like the imperial bureaucrats, but even with us, just like like in our everyday lives and like with what we're doing, like talking to our cousins about Red Hill or something, or just like asking a business to hang up a poster, like those things add up to and kind of counter that overwhelming like totalizing narrative of inevitability. And it all means something too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sam. And I think all of those things building up is like, it becomes a threat to the US military, and they see those things and they're like, wow, people are unraveling the lies that we have created and built. And I think that's why we can have this conversation today and like highlight all the nuances. It's because people's consciousness are rising. I think Becca mentioned this earlier too. It's like our collective consciousness is growing and we love to see it. Awesome. Okay, I recognize it's 5:25. We're way past what we said, what time we said we would end. But yeah, I genuinely appreciate every single person here so much. And thank you to Becca, Sam, Shelley, and Jose for making this happen.
And thank you, Anna, for everything, everything you did today, but just everything you do generally too. Thank you, Anna.